moving over to the NL Central now. So who had the best offseason in this division? A couple different teams, of course, we can mention. You have really all of them did things for sure. I want to start with the Cardinals. Did the Cardinals do enough? Is where I kind of want to start this conversation out. Sonny Gray, Lance Lynn, Kyle Gibson. They got innings. How many of those innings will be quality innings this year is my big question with this Cardinals team.
Man, this is going to be a tough division to break down because I think everyone kind of made similar moves for better or worse, right? Or at least the same amount of moves that you could go back and forth. So it really depends on how you want to break those things down. But in terms of the St. Louis Cardinals, I think they got enough as far as that veteran presence that Nolan Arenado discussed. That him and Paul Goldschmidt, they kind of lead by example. They're not players that will go in and attack with a purpose when it comes to talking with some of those young guys. And I think they really missed out on that. Obviously, in the rotation, they were able to add some veteran presence that you like that the idea of a Lance Lynn coming back and seeing if he can dial it back. A few years to when he was with the Cardinals and not looking like the guy who gave up 4 home runs in 1 inning to the Diamondbacks with the Dodgers last October. Like that's not the Lance Lynn that you want. But for an organization that has their own way, the Cardinal way, I think bringing a guy like him back, bringing back a Matt Carpenter for the position player guys, to have somebody to look to and do it that right way, so to speak. I think it will be interesting to see what happens with the Cardinals because I think they're still just in such a state of flux. Ollie Marmol just got a contract extension, and yet he's probably a top 5 guy that you might look at and say he's on a hot seat as well. So probably not now because of that extension, but I think before that, I would have kind of questioned whether Ollie Marmol is the guy to really get the Cardinals back in that right direction. So I think it was a good offseason by the Cardinals, but I don't know that it was really enough for what they're typically known to do.
I don't think I have to touch on anything more off of that. Really, I think you hit the nail on the head. I just can't give them the best offseason in this division just based on uh, it, the fact that they weren't quite aggressive enough for me still, even though they added pitching to see them not even kind of venture into the Dylan Cease trade discussions or to see Jordan Montgomery, who pitched so well in their uniform, still out there. Why can't the Cardinals afford him? Why can't they have him instead of a Gibson? I get the limb, but just even why can't you have all four? And I was actually going to mention the Ollie Marmol extension too as like a reason why it's a bad off season. I don't know why they did that. Because I just like I guess it's to give the message that he's your guy, but I just don't know if he should be your guy, which then leads me to a team where their biggest addition, probably the manager. They brought back Cody Bellinger, they signed Hector Neris, but the Chicago Cubs poached the Brewers manager who's been beating them all these years, and they get Craig Counsell to come in. Is that really akin to adding a big free agent? Like, is Craig Counsell going to be the difference in this division where the Cubs are actually going to edge out all these teams?
I think initially you want to say yes. Like, man, when you get a manager like that can make the difference. And we know that it has. I mean, Texas went out and got Bruce Bochy, and it immediately worked. But we also know that there are those legacy type managers, and I think you can begin to start to throw Craig Counsell's name in that. I know it's still kind of early in his managerial career, but he has a strong enough resume. Same thing with a guy like Dave Roberts, who I think is only going into year 8. But there are plenty of other of those legacy guys who've gone to new locations and it hasn't necessarily worked out. Hasn't necessarily failed, but it just hasn't worked out as the fan base would have hoped. Buck Showalter with the Mets, Bob Melvin in San Diego. Like it doesn't always work that way. But I think the fact that Craig Counsell knows the division and the fact that now he's got a lot more weapons, than he had in Milwaukee. Shota Imanaga, also another great acquisition by the Cubs this offseason. The trade with the Dodgers that, Yensei Almonte is a nice bullpen piece, but Michael Busch, if he's able to transition, everything he was able to do with the Oklahoma City Dodgers in AAA, they've got themselves a nice first base DH player that can be, pivotal in the middle of that lineup. So I think it's for that reason you definitely have to include Craig Counsell into the equation as far as how good your offseason was. We saw the Cubs do this once before when they went out and got Joe Madden. Could Craig Counsell be the guy that allows them to win yet another World Series?
I think there's a chance for that to be the case for sure. It's interesting that you mentioned Buck Showalter and Bob Melvin because I was thinking about how if we had this same conversation a year ago, they would have been in that same box as you bring in the legacy manager and it works well because their first season in those respective spots, they had a lot of success in the regular season. And for the Padres, they went to the NLCS. But then we see what is that value of the manager because those guys were probably the same last year, and it's the players that are ultimately going to dictate things. I did fail to mention the Imanaga signing, which is a really good one. And ultimately, I think it keeps them in this conversation as we move to some of these other teams because they might have done the most. And maybe I have unfair expectations of what I think they should have done, where if they had gone out and got Matt Chapman, the contract he signed with the Giants, very reasonable. I was just imagining an infield defense of Chapman, Swanson, and Horner, and just thinking about how good that could have been. But they did address their rotation. They addressed their bullpen. They addressed their lineup. They brought Bellinger back. It is a really good offseason. Let's look at the Brewers, who have been the top team for a little bit now. They've consistently been good, but I think we can throw them aside just because, yes, they make a nice addition with Hoskins, but then they trade Corbin Burns. Not their fault, but Brandon Woodruff goes down. Now Devin Williams goes down. They did give the contract to Jackson Churio, which I think was a really nice move too. It's a very almost Rays-esque offseason in the sense that they could still be good, but I don't think we can point to their offseason as why they're going to be good this year.
Yeah, there are some projection systems that still have the Brewers as being the best team in this division. And again, it wouldn't really surprise, right? Because they do so many of those things well as far as player development is concerned. So whether it's Craig Counsell or Pat Murphy as the manager, they're going to be all right. They'll figure those things out. Gary Sanchez, he was able to figure out a couple of things, had some success late last year. Is he going to be that guy for you? The two players that they did pick up for Corbin Burns, Joey Ortiz and DL Hall, they immediately eject them into the rotation and starting lineup. So, there are those pieces there for sure. I think the rotation is the area where they took the biggest hit, as you said. Brandon Woodruff still around. I think he re-signed a deal right with the
Yeah.
Brewers. But again, with the Tommy John surgery, that's no good. Jacob Junis, I think, is a nice one of those sneaky pickups, but he's a more of a back of the rotation guy. So name recognition alone, it was a very quiet offseason for the Milwaukee Brewers, who continue to kind of retool and get things ready for that next generation of Churios and Sal Frelick and whatnot.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they look like in 2025. I think Woodruff is a shoulder surgery, but it's the same deal. He's out all this year, could be out some of next year. They signed to a two. They first non-tendered him because his arbitration salary was just too much.
Oh yeah.
And then I was, as a Mets fan, I was saying, David Stearns, why don't you call up your boy Woodruff and see if he can be part of the 2025 plans for the Mets. The Brewers brought him back though, and I think that was a nice addition to bring him back as far as looking long term. I think it'll be big for them in 2025. But I can't say they had the best offseason when you compare it to the Cubs that definitely made moves that will put them in position to be better this season. Where the Brewers, it's a lot of internal growth. And granted, if that Burns trade works out perfectly and DL Hall can actually give them even 120 innings, I think would be asking a lot. But if they could get that out of him and he could pitch even to 80% of how well he threw the ball out of the bullpen, that's going to be a really good long-term acquisition. But we're not giving them the best offseason in this division. Let's look at the other two teams here. Pirates. I don't think they're going to contend this year, but I know you liked what they did this offseason.
Yeah, I thought it was sneaky good. Very, very frugal moves, right? In general, I think they added like $40 million in new money, not including the Mitch Keller extension, which was important. So, you bring in a closer like Aroldis Chapman, you get a left-handed starting pitcher in Marco Gonzalez and Martin Perez. Rowdy Tellez is going to be there over at first base, and you got in center field a Gold Glove caliber guy in Michael A. Taylor. If Yasmani Grandal's healthy, maybe he can turn back the clock a little bit and you bring back Andrew McCutcheon. So like all those moves you go, hey, I actually know some of the names of the players on the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like I think that bodes well for, how good your off season was. You know, is it going to pan out for those guys? Will they all be able to have somewhat of a career year or career resurgence because some of them are a little bit older? Probably not. But even still, you got to give the front office credit for going out and spending more money than they might typically in an off season to make their team better.
And I really believe that O'Neal Cruz has the chance to put this team on the map a little bit. I mean, I don't know if I'm picking O'Neal Cruz to win the MVP this year, but like, could O'Neal Cruz get some sneaky down the ballot MVP votes for having a great bounce back season off of the fractured leg and establish himself as one of the better shortstops in baseball? I think that's in the cards. And if they could have a player like that right in the middle of everything they got going on there, not to mention if Henry Davis can have a nice season, they have the pieces, and you know what? They gave themselves a shot in a division that is very open. They could have still looked at the timeline of their team and say, we'll just look at 2025. We're not quite there yet. We'll see what happens. And no, they fortified themselves, and they could absolutely be in the mix. And who knows? They could be a sneaky team that's adding at the deadline if they can have a better than expected first half. The Reds are a team that had the breakout last year. I think they did some nice things this offseason. The Jeimer Candelario signing, massive now with Noelvi Marte being suspended. And I can't fault their offseason for one of their top prospects, or maybe the top prospect, getting suspended, and their best rookie from last year getting hurt. But I just can't help but look at this team with Matt McLain out now and think, I don't believe in this Reds team the way I did a month ago.
Sure, sure. And if you remember the start of the offseason, the Reds were the team that were going out and they were making all those moves between Frankie Montas to Nick Martinez and the Jeimer Candelario deal, right? More recently, they acquired Santiago Espinal from Toronto. They also had Emilio Pagan. So like they went out and got guys, a homegrown guy and Brent Suter, who's very good out of the bullpen for the Rockies last year. So they kind of had the best off season of, for the first month, at least going into those winter meetings. But you're right. It's hard to look at, this roster and say, that they're going to win the division or be in contention, which I think they still definitely have that chance, but it definitely takes a hit, when you lose two big pieces in McLain and Noelvi Marte because of the suspension. But if we're just talking about the offseason, I mean, they did a solid job. I mean, they really were on par with so many of the other teams in the division. If we're gonna maybe give a division the award for best off season, it's probably the National League Central because everybody did something to try and make their team better, right? It might not have been, for the amount of money that other divisions went out and spent with $100, $200 million or $700 million contracts. But still, I think, there's a lot of new blood in that NL Central that really could allow any of these five fan bases feel solid enough to say, you know what, I think we're going to win the division.
It's crazy. I was just today, I wrote an article as the NL Central preview, and basically it's taking all five of our season previews, plugging it into an article, and I just sort of wrote an introduction. But I did say that in the introduction that all five of these teams legitimately have a shot. To me, with the Reds, I was knocking them in my head where I was saying, man, why couldn't they get Michael A. Taylor? Because also TJ Friedel just went down. But then I remembered when TJ Friedel went down, it was like 2 days after Michael A. Taylor signed. So they really have been snake bitten the last couple of weeks here. Just everything that could go wrong has gone wrong for the Reds. And the reason why they might not have been more aggressive at points this offseason is they had so much talent, they had so much depth, and now they're going to really have to rely on it to be able to get through this first part of the season until they get Marte back from the suspension, until McLain and Friedel potentially come back in the second half. I think McLain could be a little bit sooner, if I'm not mistaken, but still, I don't think they had the best offseason, but it definitely wasn't a bad one. It was a strong offseason. I think ultimately I'm gonna go Cubs, but Cubs Pirates to me might be the ultimate decision here.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Cubs Pirates 1A 1B on that. And again, the talent pools are totally different
Yeah.
between the Cubs and the Pirates, but I probably would give the edge to the Cubs for sure.
There we go. So the Cubs with Craig Counsell, Bellinger, and Managa, Bush, big offseason for them. And I do believe they are the favorites going into the season. So I guess you can also give them a little extra bonus point there for that as well.